also Montgomery County School System School Board special session is called to order. We have 3 items that we'll be discussing. And we'll start with item number 1, is going to be 2022-2023 rezoning recommendations. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Huff.
Thank you so much. Board members, as you know, there was a rezoning recommendation that was made for the first presentation on January the 4th. And then a final recommendation was made on February 8th. In front of you is the map that has not changed, but a part of that February 8th presentation was a grandfathering plan that was shared. And Mr. Brumley is available if you have any questions regarding any of that information before you take your vote.
Thank you, Dr. Huff. So at this time, do we have a motion to accept the rezoning? We have Mr. Gordon. Do we have a second? We got Ms. Pace. We'll move to discussion. Ms. Batty.
Thank you, sir. First, I'd like to thank Mr. Brumley and his staff, as well as our consultants for the work on this. I know it's a lot of time and effort, and I really appreciate the work that you all put into it. I also would like to say that I appreciate staff listening to a lot of the feedback we got as far as grandfathering certain students in, based on what grade they were in and when they would be entering the different middle schools and high schools. This is a tough one for me because I have a large amount of people who are affected by this, and I have received quite a bit of feedback from this. People opposed in my district to this rezoning. I know the different things that staff has looked at going into this rezoning. I know it's more than just looking at geographically where somebody is closest to as far as what school. There are several other factors that come into play. I feel like they have done their due diligence on this, and I appreciate that. I'm going to be voting against this only because of the response I've gotten from my constituents. I just want to make this statement before I vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. Mr. Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brumley, you might not be prepared for this, but, or either Dr. Huff, if you could go over the grandfather clause, just to, not to clarify anybody else, but to clarify me.
So after listening to the feedback from parents and guardians, we made a modification to the proposal that we presented on the 4th, and that modification included a transition phase-in or rezoning exceptions for middle schoolers and high schoolers. So the middle schoolers, the exception is to allow a choice for all currently enrolled 6th and 7th grade students to attend either their currently assigned middle school or their newly assigned middle schools for the 22-23 school year. Transportation would need to be provided by the family, and the choice would apply for the student's middle school attendance only. And then once the student reaches high school age, he or she will be expected to attend their zone high school.
Right. Their zoning that they've been assigned to if this passes.
And then there's a similar exception for high school students for the 23 and 24 school year. And it would allow a choice for all currently enrolled 8th, 9th, and 10th grade students to attend either their currently assigned school or their newly assigned high school in the 23-24 school year. Transportation would, of course, need to be provided.
Thank you.
Ms. Pace.
I'd like to tag on in a sense to what Mr. Fagan said. I'm thanking all the effort that we put in to the rezoning plan. Zoning procedures are always difficult and uncomfortable, but it's a necessity. It's an unpleasant consequence and a requirement of county growth and progress and the accompanying increased school enrollment. And when multi-million-dollar school structures are inserted in the middle of the county, the students have to be pulled from their home school to populate that new school, no matter how crowded the previous school is. It's always a difficult and emotional situation for parents and students. thank you to all of you for the hard work, the effort, all of you that are involved, the school system and parents, in providing the fairest and the most feasible zoning plan for everybody that were directly affected. We appreciate the effort.
Thank you, Ms. Bates. Is there any other discussion?
Everybody thanking the staff is always does an excellent job in making sure that we have the facilities that we own properly staffed and actually people within them. But I also would like to thank the parents and those that actually came out and spoke up on behalf of the children. Your job is to advocate for your child. But our job is to make sure that the decisions that are made is for the betterment of the child. And make sure that they have proper space, safe space, and adequate facilities to be able to go and get a quality education. I thank the staff as well for your time, but I'd like to give a special shout out to the parents that took the time to come out, and especially those two young gentlemen that spoke at our last meeting. I'd like to thank them for coming, speaking to us as well.
Thank you, Ms. Carter.
I would like to say, as a retired teacher, class size really did matter for me as a classroom teacher. And at one time I had 35 first graders, too many. But because the population was so vast, I had to teach 35 first graders. It was very hard. I just think that if the class sizes are kept to the size that they're supposed to be, then I believe that the academic progress that we need our students to make will take place. So therefore, I'm letting you know that class size does count, and we have over 400 students in some of our middle schools over the population that should be there. So therefore, I have to say that we have to open Kirkwood for the sake of the children, and that's why we serve for what's best for children. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. Mr. Griffin.
One of the items I'm gonna vote for only because the change in the grandfather clause was put in. I'm voting for it with regret, because I hate to see that many people disrupted. But I don't see where there's a choice. You can change the people, but you can't change the numbers. And so I don't see where there's a choice but to vote in favor of this reasonable proposal, thanks to the grandfather clause. Because as long as our county, city is growing at the rate it is, we're gonna have to build new buildings with students in. You can't build a new building and leave it empty. And I just hope that the people that are attached to the schools that are going through now, that are gonna find new ones, and quickly become just as attached to them. Understand in a short time that the South Beach or one of these schools care just as deeply for your child as the one that you lived. I respect Josh Baggett, where he's living, and the effect it's gonna have on him and his constituents. And I'm probably doing the same thing. But I'm gonna regretfully have to be in favor of this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Is there any other discussion? There being none, we'll put the motion to a vote. All in favor of the rezoning recommendation?
Chair, would you call for a roll call vote for Mr. Baggett's purpose? Roll call
We can do that, sure. Okay, we'll go ahead and conduct a roll call vote. Please state your district and your vote.
Carol Berry, District 1, yes, we will, need to rezone.
Margaret Hayes, District 2, I'm in favor of the rezoning plan.
Herbert Nelson, District 3, in favor.
Charles Patterson, District 6, yes.
Josh Baggett, District 7, no.
vote. Ken Griffey, District 4, yes.
Jimmy Garland, District 5, yes.
And I count a 6-1 vote, and so this rezoning passes. Our next item for this evening is the teacher tenure considerations. And I'm gonna pass that off to Dr. Huff.
Yes, thank you, sir. At the January 11th, 2022 board meeting, the teacher tenure list was provided to you, and at that time, there were 2 teachers that were pending for that consideration, and so this evening, the remaining names, those 2 names are here for you to approve tenure for these 2 individuals. And if you have any questions regarding this, Ms. Johnson is available to answer those.
Thank you, Dr. Huff. Do we have a motion to accept the teacher tenure?
Mr. Chair, I move to accept the teacher tenure list of consideration.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Paxton. Do I have a second? Ms. Baggett? Any discussion? There being none, we put it to a vote. All in favor, signify by raising your right hand. Thank you. And I have 7-0, the motion passed. Our next item is consideration and adopt criteria for director's search. And at this point in time, I'm gonna turn it over to Mr. Melvin.
Thank you. If you all remember, several weeks ago, Tammy Britton, our consultant, came and gave a presentation and kind of a status on the feedback that she had received so far. And she needs the board to consider and adopt 3 different things tonight. One is the minimum qualifications for the director of schools. I was asked, so I did look it up. The minimum qualification in the state of Tennessee for a director of school pursuant to 49-2-301 is the director of school must have a bachelor's degree. So that's the minimum. I also looked back in the past, I could find no record where the board in previous searches had added additional requirements above the minimum. Now that doesn't mean when you consider who your candidates are, when you want to select who you want to interview, that you can't look at all their qualifications. But if the board wants to add additional qualifications, this tonight would be the time to discuss that and add it. So that's one thing that the board needs to consider. The second thing the board needs to consider is approval of the 10 points for the selection criteria. She gave you the packet that was on the front page, and it says that candidates will be evaluated in accordance with the distinct qualities as well as professional accomplishments, with the emphasis on the 10 points, and that was based upon the feedback that she received. That doesn't mean these are the only criteria that the board would consider when evaluating a candidate, but this is the 10 that would be emphasized or looked at primarily or first. So that would be the second thing to review and consider adoption of that selection criteria. And then the third was the adoption of procedures for the superintendent search. She had outlined on page 4 of the program a 7-step process. Under the governance process GP 14, it outlines the steps and basically says that the board shall decide the process to which the interviews are conducted and by the method which the director would be selected. So that would accomplish your requirement in GP 14 by adopting a procedure for the search process. So everybody knows what the procedure is, all on the board, the public, and the potential candidates. So those are the 3 things that you need to consider and discuss and adopt something tonight, because that would start the next process to do the advertising for TSBA, posting the job, and start getting the process of the candidates filled. So if you remember, as Ms. Grissom said, the longer we wait, the shorter time we have to get people to apply and to review. So those are the 3 things. I'm happy to answer any questions about the 3. If not, those are the 3 items y'all need to discuss.
I'd just like to
either a double, I would like to say a double master's or a doctorate. And the reason why I say it is because we have so many people at the doctorate level in the district. We need to have someone at the leadership that also can identify with their position. That is my only concern. I have other concerns, but as far as the minimum, a double master's or a doctorate. I have other things I'd like to add to it as we go through.
Okay, so that's two motions.
All right, I was gonna say, I think the first motion is to adopt at least the minimum requirements that the state requires. Then you can discuss adding additional requirements to that and vote on those additional requirements as they come up. So that would be the proper way to do it.
Ms. Patterson.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we accept the minimum qualifications for the search for the board director.
I'll second Charlie's motion.
All right. Motion's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion on it?
I don't know where to make my suggestion.
Well, if any of you want to make a modification to above the minimum, this is where you would make a motion for the modification to add additional requirements, and then there would be a second.
I make a motion to amend the second to include either double masters or a doctorate.
Second, Mr. Garland's motion. Any discussion?
Yes, sir. I myself am more in favor of Mr. Griffey's thought process. If we're gonna up the standards, only moving it up to a master's. And I say that because there could be quite a few qualified good candidates out there that do not have a doctorate or second master's. We have hired in the past for this position without a doctorate or second master's, and we have done so successfully. I feel like we hit a home run in that particular scenario. So as far as I'm concerned, I would think sticking with just a master's would be good.
I really can't say that we were successful because we lost a person that had a double master's because when he came on, we didn't pay him what he was deserving. And I believe that it'll be easier to actually accommodate someone with a double master's or a doctorate degree when it comes to this district. This district is a growing district. We have children coming in every year. We increase 500, 600, 700, 800 students per year, every year over the last 10, 15 years. So the bottom line is it's not gonna go down, it's gonna continue to go up. And more responsibility is gonna be laid in their hands. And so we need someone that is experienced and that understands the ramifications that comes with this job.
Let me clear up where we're at. We have a motion from Mr. Garland to have a double master's or a doctorate. And that motion has been seconded. And now we have a new motion from Mr. Griffey to make it a minimum.
I will second Charlie's motion.
And my motion was to get it on the table.
Okay, so Mr. Patterson has a motion to have minimum of a master's degree. Okay, has that seconded?
Now, actually, my motion, if I said it wrong, I wanted minimum qualifications, and I was hoping we was gonna have some amendments to vote on after that. My motion was for minimum qualification, just to get it on the table, where we could discuss it, and of course, vote on it, and then move, if we have any other amendments, such as Mr. Griffey's and Mr. Garland's, that we could vote on those,
Okay, so.
if I'm in order.
So, do we have a motion on the table for the master's degree being a minimum? Is there a motion?
I will make it, I thought this was Mr. Patterson, he said accept. And I second his.
All right, excuse me, Mr. Griffey, if I may, I could, since we haven't voted on it, because eventually we're gonna get to it, I hope. But, my motion would be that we accept the, minimum qualifications that Mr. Nolan has discussed, plus a master's degree on top of it, that would be my motion.
The minimum requirements, yeah, master.
Right.
So that is-
Except the minimum qualifications plus a master's. If I'm saying that right.
You're not raising the
So-
master.
So the minimum
Okay, the minimum does have a
qualification,
master's?
excuse me,
Okay, I'm sorry. Let's start over, Mr. Chair, excuse me. I move that we accept the minimum qualifications.
so let's clear this up. The minimum qualification is a bachelor's degree. That's the minimum.
With the masters.
Well, the minimum qualification in state law is a bachelor's degree. But my understanding is that Mr. Patterson has a motion that would raise what we consider the minimum to, you must have a master's degree to apply. So, you don't get a master's degree without a bachelor's degree, so we don't have to really say that again. So if that modification is adopted on the superintendent search criteria where it is listed blank of minimum qualifications, it would be filled in as master's degree required.
So,
Again, excuse me, Mr. Chair.
go ahead, Mr. Patterson.
Again, I was trying to get the minimum, which I was under understanding that the minimum was a bachelor's. Get that voted on, and if we accepted it, then move up to, voting on, a master's, as Mr. Griffith suggested, and or as Mr. Garland suggested, a double, master's to vote up or down on those. That was my intention. Now, if I need to, I'll be glad to restate my motion and move that we accept the minimum recommendation plus a master's. If I'd be in order,
So, Mr.
that would be my
Patterson,
motion.
I think to get to what you're trying to achieve is make the minimum qualification a master's degree for this search. If I'm understanding correctly.
Yes.
Okay. So, do we have a second for that motion? We have, motion and seconded by Mr. Griffey. Any further discussion? Okay, let's put it to the vote. Now, we still have a motion from Mr. Garland to have a double master, so we need to vote on that first. All in favor of
Just a second, Mr. Chair. Which one are we voting on first then?
the motion that was made by Mr. Griffey, Mr. Garland, to have a double master's or doctorate?
Gotcha, okay.
All in favor of Mr. Garland's motion to have a double master's or doctorate, signify by raising your right hand. Okay. All opposed? Okay, that motion fails. Now we'll move on to vote on, Mr. Patterson's motion to have a master's degree. All in favor of having a minimum of a master's degree for education, signify by raising your right hand. And that motion passes. So our next issue, consider is approval of the, Mr. Patterson.
I'm sorry. Wait, we call on. Go ahead with your discussion. I don't want to make a motion. I'm sorry.
Okay. Approval of the 10 points for the selection criteria. Do we have a motion to accept that as is? We have Mr. Patterson. Do we have a second? We got Ms. Berry. Open up for discussion.
I think we need to add something into those points, about ability to develop and build good employee morale and good moral character. I didn't find that wording in any of them, and I think that should be added or included somewhere.
So I have your motion as to, include, employee morale and, motivation of staff.
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay.
And good moral character.
And do we have a second?
If I may, Mr. Chair, number 4, the wording in it talks about maintain high morale among employees. So, I don't
So, Mr. Griffin,
Building our employee morale is gonna be key to keeping our staff, employees as we grow.
so can I have the motion, Mr. Griffin?
To add accent to building employee morale and good moral character. It's listed in there for moral character is for, I think, for the staff, but I think it also needs to be included for the director.
Do I have a second to Mr. Griffin's motion? We got Mr. Gordon. Any further discussion? None? So we can put that to a vote at this point in time. All those in favor of accepting the additional motion to have, moral character and, employee morale, signify by raising your right hand. Right, motion passes 7-0. And now we'll go back and, vote on the consideration to, correct.
Right, and so what I would suggest is that that's just point number 11. So now what's on the table is for consideration or additional discussion of adopting of 11 criteria. So that's what's on the table now.
Okay. So the motion's been added to adopt an additional criteria to our, what we have laid out at this point. Which is the approval of the 10-point system. So now that would be actually a 11-point, criteria. Yes, Mr. Patterson.
I move we accept the 11-point criteria.
All right, the motion's been moved by Mr. Patterson and seconded by Mr. Garland. Any discussion? There being none, we'll go ahead and put it to a vote. All in favor of accepting the 11 criteria for the director, would signify by raising your right hand. Thank you. The motion passes 7-0. Now, our final point on this is, approval of the procedures for the superintendent search.
And that was what was on page 4 of the 7 procedures, just to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about.
I move that we accept procedures as listed.
Thank you, Mr. Griffey. Do we have a second?
Second.
It's seconded by Mr. Patterson. Any discussion? Mr. Laddie?
Number 5, 6, and 7, I had a few things to say about those 3 items. Number 5 talks about at the end of the process, each board member will list, but not rank his or her top 2 choices. I don't feel like we should necessarily have to list 2 if we don't think there are 2. You know, the way this reads, if we approve this, it's saying that each one of us will rank 2. If we don't feel like 2 should be included in our finalists, I don't feel like we should have to do that. Number 6, candidate receiving the most votes may be invited to return for a second interview. This person will not be identified as the board's first choice, but will become the board's candidate of focus. The board will follow the same procedure with the remaining candidate if necessary. The wording there, I'm assuming what they're meaning here is that if we have the 2 highest, the 2 candidates receiving the highest amount of votes could be brought back for a second interview, but I'm worried about how the wording is there. I feel like we should be able to bring up two back for a final interview if we so choose. Then also it talks about at any time during this stage, a motion to enter into contract negotiation will be in order. I feel like that should be held off until we finish with the second round of interviews before we're able to start doing anything as far as making a motion to negotiate contracts. Then the last one, number 7, talks about making an effort to receive a unanimous vote from the board. In my personal opinion, I believe we just do away with that one. I think that's the ultimate goal for everybody, but you know, that may or may not happen. And if we wind up selecting someone by not unanimous, that's who we're gonna wind up going with, so. I would make those, Mr. Nolan, I don't know if I need to make 3 separate motions for those 3 separate points, or.
I mean, you could, if you're, well, you'd have to state what you want your motion to be. We would do 3 different times.
Could I do one to cover all 3 of them? Or
Yes.
Okay. I would make a motion then for number 5 that it states we could list up to 2 choices. In that step. Number 6, I'll make a motion that wording there indicates that we could bring up to 2 finalists back for second interviews, and that we would not make any motions for entering in contract negotiations until after those interviews have been completed. And then, I would also ask that number 7 be removed.
You know, I think that number 7 was put there, Josh, because that's what we did at the last nomination. At the end of the process, once we voted, we went back and voted that last time, to make it unanimous. I think that's what we were trying to get to.
And it does not say it must be, it just says an effort will be made.
Okay, so Mr. Baggett has a motion on the table for number 5, 6, and 7. Do we have a second for that motion? Okay, there being none, we'll go back to our original motion, is to adopt the criteria for the director search. And so approval for procedures for the superintendent's search process. We have a motion to accept as is.
I move that we accept the process as printed.
Okay, we have Mr. Garland, and we've got Ms. Page seconded. All right, is there any further discussion? Mr. Baggett?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a new motion, that the changes I had spoken about for steps 5 and 6 be put into place, but withdrawing what I requested for step 7 in that motion. Step 7 says an effort will be made to select a candidate who can receive a unanimous vote, so the superintendent will have a position of strong support. Yeah.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, that motion's been made and seconded by Mr. Griffey. Any further discussion? So as it stands, what we're voting on at this point is removing number 7.
No, sir. 7 would stay under this motion.
7 would stay and remove 5 and 6.
No, 5 and 6 would stay. What it would be is for number 5, instead of stating that we have to list 2 choices, we could list up to 2 choices. And in number 6, the wording would be changed to indicate that we could bring up to 2 candidates back for a second interview, and that we would not enter into contract negotiations until after those second rounds of interviews have been conducted.
Okay, so we have declared the changes to number 5 and number 6.
I'd like to encourage Mr. Baggett to reword it, of course, not contract officers.
Use microphone. Use microphone, please.
I'd like to encourage Mr. Baggett to reword his point 6 about contract proposals, because it may be you need to enter into a contract negotiation with the right person who's here at the right time, and I wouldn't want to be restricted from doing so, if that happens.
That's a very valid point. Completely understand where you're coming from there. My rationale and reasoning there is just trying to be fair across the board with both candidates and the rest of the board members, depending on who they may be.
Yeah,
Leaning more towards.
and I think your first 2 portions do that.
Okay, so we have a new motion then from Mr. Griffey.
I did not make a motion, I was encouraging him to reword his. If he
Okay.
didn't, he didn't.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay, so as it stands is number 5 and number 6. Whereas number 5, we can bring up to 2 candidates before the board. And, number 6 is, you said number 6, please? Gary?
Number 6 would be changing it to, us being able to bring up to 2 candidates back for a second round of interviews and not entering into contract negotiations until after both those interviews have been completed.
And the motion has been made and has been seconded. So, do we have any other discussion on the motion? Okay, there being none, let's go ahead and, put the, 3rd to a vote.
Amend Mr. Baggett's amendment first.
Correction. So we're gonna vote on Mr. Baggett's amendment. All in favor, signify by raising your right hand. All opposed? Okay, the motion passes 6-1. And now we'll move back to the original motion. Okay, so we'll move back to approval of procedures. That's been motioned and seconded. And we've had discussions, so we'll put that to a vote. All in favor of approval of procedures for, superintendent search, signify by raising your right hand.
One question before you call the vote, it would be signify for approval with amendments included, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. So we'll put it to a vote. All in favor, signify by raising your right hand. And the motion passes 7-0. And I want to thank you for your participation, and this concludes the CMCSS School Board Special Voting Session.